Hello, how's everyone doing this evening? I hope that all is well with all of you, as well as it can be amid a pandemic, as well as it can be amid an upcoming presidential election. But we're here, I'm here with you, you're here with me, and we're going to have a nice Saturday evening chat conversation. If you haven't been here before, or you're new, or you for some reason are not subscribed, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell, because many of you wouldn't be here if it weren't for the fact that you received a notification from the notifications bell. So you see that bell, click on it. And yeah, I've got some prepared opening remarks, like I always do for these kinds of conversations. And then from there, we'll do our roll call. I will call you out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I will answer your super chat questions. Pretty straightforward, pretty normal, pretty much a normal evening. Even though we are not living in normal times, I will begin this evening and conduct this evening as a normal YouTube live conversation. All right, writing it down. QAnon. Challenge their thinking. Thanks. And any other super chats, like I said, I will address them after the roll call. But folks, right now, the ruling class of the United States, best news outlets, the ruling class of the United States is trying its hardest to hold back history. They are trying to prevent inevitable things from occurring. Great example. Today, the exchange section of the Wall Street Journal, weekend edition. U.S. curbs hinder Huawei's growth. Restrictions on access to chips pose threat. Because of the fact that China is a country rising up from poverty, because of the fact that China is a country that has poured huge amounts of money into research and development, the Western telecommunications corporations like AT&T and Verizon are now having to face a competitor from China, and they don't like that. But this is inevitable. When a country like China rises up from poverty, millions of people are lifted out of poverty, pours all kinds of money into research and development, the result is going to be the development of new telecommunications giants. And Huawei Technologies is the result of a historical process. Right? As China rises up from poverty, as the dominance of the West in the global economy is rolled back, as a result, we see the rise of Huawei. And so Washington and Silicon Valley are scrambling to try and prevent something that is inevitable from occurring. But it's very similar to what's happening with Facebook. Very similar. Very, very similar to what's going on. Right? Facebook is being pressured by the government to crack down, to not allow viewpoints from around the world, to not allow certain ideas deemed to be conspiracy theories. Facebook is being pressured. But Facebook is very afraid to tighten its grip because of the fact that other social media outlets exist. And it's only a matter of time before the tech giants located in Southern California no longer have the absolute monopoly they have now. If Twitter cracks down too hard, if YouTube cracks down too hard, pretty soon, there will be alternatives to them that spring up, especially alternatives coming from Russia, from China, from Latin America, from Africa. Alternatives that will not be controlled as well by the West. Right? In the last couple weeks, as we head to the election, there has been a huge wave of censorship on social media. Huge wave of censorship on social media. Jason Unruhe has been very vocal about the fact that he received a strike on a video he made debunking Pizzagate. It was called, Pizzagate is a dumb conspiracy theory, and they gave him a strike for this video. Not only did they take it down, they gave him a strike for this video, calling it cyberbullying. So refuting Pizzagate conspiracy theories, according to YouTube, is considered to be cyberbullying. Isha, a well-known anti-imperialist on Twitter, had her account briefly suspended because she said in a tweet that people should kill the Joe McCarthy inside their head. Obviously, referring to the anti-communist fanatic inside their head. They should suppress it. Well, according to Twitter, this was a threat of violence against Joe McCarthy, and so her account was suspended. Now, all kinds of crazy things are happening. Last week, I noticed that I was unable to tweet for 4 or 5 hours. Every time I would try to tweet, it would pop up, "We are unable to send this tweet." And they gave no reason. And many of the people I associate with and have a similar perspective with me experienced the exact same thing. Furthermore, I've noticed videos that I've made from a long time ago are suddenly getting age restricted. Very odd. Very, very, very odd. And it's unclear why they are being age restricted. The debate I had with Augustus Sol Invictus is now age restricted. The video that I did at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter protests, where I talked about the history of the Black Belt and Black nationalism in the United States. How can I promote socialism with American characteristics to fierce, anti-socialist North Korean living defector? Okay. Writing it down. Ooh. Okay. Right? This is happening. Right? A video I made on the history of Black nationalism has been age restricted. Now, they haven't taken down any of my videos yet. They have not, as of yet. They have not given me any strikes or tried to say I violated any rules. But this is certainly disturbing, and it shows that things can happen. Right? I mean, they can swing into action and cause you problems. I'm being careful. And I encourage anybody else to. I've been uploading my content on BitChute because BitChute is a platform. Do anarchists support cancel culture more? Ideology. All right. Now, the thing is, the more they do this, the more that they restrict certain content on the internet, the more that people are just going to go elsewhere, the stronger that they're going to make. And pretty soon there's going to be an alternative to YouTube. Pretty soon there's going to be an alternative to Twitter. Pretty soon there's going to be an alternative to Facebook that is just as strong. Right now they have a virtual monopoly, but the more they tighten their grip, not to quote Star Wars, but the more they tighten their grip, the more will slip through their fingers, and the more there's going to be alternatives. And the same goes for fossil fuels. Humanity needs to get off of fossil fuels. The global order centered around oil, where oil is the basis of the global economy, needs to come to an end. Fossil fuels are creating global warming. Fossil fuels are a big problem. And it's only a matter of time before we have a higher energy source, like fusion energy, that'll get us out of fossil fuels. However, Wall Street is trying to hold off the inevitable. They're trying to declare that economic development around the world must end. They're trying to declare that, the only way to stop global warming is to reduce consumption and to reduce the population. Pessimism is often rooted in trying to hold off the inevitable. You can assemble the greatest geologists and scientists in the world, but they cannot prevent a volcano from erupting. Right? You can assemble the greatest economists in the world, and they cannot prevent the fact that if people don't have the ability to spend money, the economy is not going to get better. That trying to hold off the inevitable is the curse facing the ruling class of the United States in this time. They are trying to hold off the inevitable. Countries around the world are rising up from poverty. Economic development is taking place. The rule and global dominance of Western corporations is fading. A new world is in birth. And the only hope for Wall Street is to stop the wheels of time from turning. And that is what they are very actively trying to do. History is marching forward, and they do not want history to march forward. They want to turn back time. And that is the basis of pessimism. My Patreon. Great. Thank you, Kinky. Always appreciate it. Always appreciate it. Always appreciate it. And we'll put that in the super chats. I want to talk about something about that. Folks, history is going to keep marching forward. It's going to keep marching forward. It is not going to stop. But pessimism is everywhere. The idea that tomorrow is worse than today, that the world is going to hell, that history should end, is everywhere. Now, the Wall Street Journal Weekend Review was particularly amusing. This is the special Weekend Review section that they have, right? And they said it's when elections are transformative. It's basically a get out the vote message. And of course, it references the 1864 presidential election in the United States. In 1864, the USA was in the middle of a civil war, and Abraham Lincoln was running to get reelected, and the Democrats were running on a platform of basically making peace with the South. If Lincoln had not won the 1864 presidential election, it's very likely that the South would have been allowed to secede from the United States and continue slavery. So it was very decisive that Abraham Lincoln won that election. Of course, who campaigned very hard for Abraham Lincoln in that election? Karl Marx. The New York City Democratic Party newspaper at that point, the New York City Republican Party newspaper at that point was the New York Tribune, edited by Horace Greeley. And he employed Karl Marx to write for the New York Tribune. And he wrote glowing articles endorsing and praising Abraham Lincoln and giving Abraham Lincoln advice on how he could win the war. The writings of Karl Marx on the American Civil War are fantastic. The other thing is that on the back page, right, we have All the King's Men, a political novel for all eras. All the King's Men, which was a novel that was an attack on Huey Long, the governor of Louisiana. They made it into a movie in 1949. It's an anti-populist novel about, this politician who starts out good, fighting for the little guy, but turns into a crooked, evil politician. And they're, of course, pushing this, right? Because populism is the specter hanging over the ruling class in our time. This is what the ruling class is pushing. Folks, a center of power in the United States right now, and really a center of power around the globe right now, is Silicon Valley. the tech monopolists, the tech giants. And I have often used the phrase Silicon Valley fascists. Why do I use the phrase Silicon Valley fascists? Why do I call them fascists? Many people have asked, why do I call them fascists? Well, if you go to Silicon Valley, you will find a number of people with a fascist belief system. Right? On Silicon Valley, you will find many, many objectivists, people who are followers of Ayn Rand, who believe that compassion is a form of weakness, that kindness and human solidarity must be destroyed, that altruism, D'Souza, all right, D'Souza, Republican Party, realize, all right. You'll find many objectivists in Silicon Valley, people who don't believe in human compassion. There's a very famous review of Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged, by a right-winger named Whittaker Chambers. And for the National Review, Whittaker Chambers reviewed Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's huge, well over 1,000-page novel. And he said that behind every line of the novel, there is a voice saying, "To the gas chamber, go." That even this right-wing, anti-communist nutjob, Whittaker Chambers, understood how fascist Ayn Rand really was. And of course, Ayn Rand, her response is, oh, fascism is a form of collectivism, right? They believe in national unity. I believe in, no one should ever work together, blah, 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 blah. Well, the drive, the cruelty, the indifference to others, the might makes right, all of that stuff is fascist. And, you'll find many Ayn Rand objectivists working at Google, working at YouTube, working at Twitter, working at Facebook. Silicon Valley is full of objectivists. Furthermore, Silicon Valley is full of Malthusians. Malthusians. Joe Biden. All right. Joe Biden. TPP. Chile. Privatization. Okay. Malthusianism is the idea there are too many people in the world, that the population's growth outstrips the food supply, and that the human population must be reduced. It's from Robert Malthus, who coined the term overpopulation. Furthermore, the Nazis, they started talking about what they referred to as useless eaters, people who provide nothing to society, but they eat, right? And this is, there's a famous Nazi poster where it has a disabled man. It says, this man cost the German taxpayer this much money. It was on that basis they started exterminating disabled people. Malthusianism is a very, very rotten ideology. It was a member of the British royal family who said that he wished he could be reincarnated as a deadly virus that would kill off huge chunks of the human population. There's another quote from a member of the British royal family where they talk about the fact that on a certain island they cured malaria, and people weren't dying from malaria. And what they didn't realize was that malaria was regulating the population. It was horrible stuff, right? Malthusianism is contempt for humanity. Right? This belief that the problem is not capitalism, of course. The problem is that poor people especially, have too many children. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was really into Malthusianism, right? There were posters, or there was a book she wrote called The Cruelty of Charity, right? You will find this kind of thinking in Silicon Valley a lot. And there's been attacks on them from the right, interestingly. Talk about how the folks on Silicon Valley think that they owe nothing to the United States as a country, feel like they got where they are simply by their own hard work, and that is very much an Ayn Rand objectivist perspective. That is very much a Malthusian perspective. In Silicon Valley, you will find a lot of people who consider themselves to be the Übermenschen, to be the superior group, the Superman. They think they are better than everyone else. They think the rest of humanity are inferior. and need to be governed by them. And if you want any further proof of that, look into the fact that Mark Zuckerberg's hero is Caesar Augustus. Let me repeat that. The personal hero of Mark Zuckerberg, according to a number of interviews he has given, is Caesar Augustus, the Roman emperor who took power in the aftermath of the death of Julius Caesar. Malthusianism. Okay. Malthusianism. Neoconservatism. Satanic. Question mark. Okay. Augustus Caesar. Because he created, according to Mark Zuckerberg, he created world peace with his Pax Romana, right? And that's why Mark Zuckerberg is obsessed, apparently, with Augustus Caesar. Now, the Roman Empire was a quite abominable empire. It was based on holding back human development. It was a slave system. And slavery is a highly inefficient system. Right? The more slaves you have, the less efficient it becomes, because a slave has no motivation to do any work. You know, in a household, right? When you have slavery in a household, and the slave generally partakes of the productivity of an individual household, there may be some motivation. However, when you have a big plantation or a big mine, as the Romans had, they had big plantations, they had big mines. The slaves in those big plantations and in those big mines have no motivation to work, because the only thing in it for them is if they do not work hard, they will be beaten. If they do not work hard, they might be deprived of food. But other than that, there's really no motivation. And in many of the mines in which slaves worked, it was almost a death sentence. You were guaranteed to die in these mines after a few years. So there was really no motivation to work. And so, of course, if you have a bunch of slaves and they have no motivation to work, you're going to have a slave whose job it is to tell the other slaves to work harder, right? And if you have even more slaves than that, pretty soon you're going to have a slave who tells the slaves who tell the slaves to work harder. And you can see how highly inefficient slavery becomes. Slavery is a very inefficient system. It works perhaps in an individual household. It can work to some degree or other when the slave has an interest in seeing the household become more prosperous. However, big plantations, mines, not an efficient system. Feudalism is much more efficient than slavery. In feudalism, every serf or peasant has their little tract of land, and they work very, very hard, and they pay their obligation to the aristocrat or noble or landowner, and then they get to keep the surplus, so they work as hard as they can. It's much more efficient, much, much more efficient. The Roman Empire maintained the slave system, and it continued to become more and more inefficient. The larger the Roman Empire got, the less and less efficient it became. Rome, as you'll recall, was, for the first 200 years, a republic. It was the Roman Republic. And why was it a republic? Was it because the Romans just believed in democracy and they loved democracy? Absolutely not. Rome was a republic for the simple reason that if there is not only one ruling family, if there is a Senate that is hereditary, in which all the major landowning families are represented, they will have much more motivation to help build the empire. Right? If you have one individual house, one king, everyone who's not in with that king is going to be like, okay, I guess I'll fight because the king said so. But if you have a Senate, a Roman Senate, where all the major families are represented and have a say to some degree or other, they'll all be motivated to build the empire. They had a hereditary Senate. They had an elected assembly. That was the Roman Republic. But then you had the rise of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar. And Julius Caesar was a populist, and he fought for the Roman proletarians, and he was a city builder, and he built libraries, and he wanted to expand Roman citizenship to people throughout the empire. And he was a progressive, and he freed lots of slaves. He made it so doctors were no longer slaves. He made it so teachers were no longer slaves. He engaged in all kinds of progressive reforms. He legalized Judaism, right? Judaism was illegal. It was illegal to preach in ancient Rome that there was only one God. You could be put to death for that, because that meant you were denying the gods of the empire. But Julius Caesar made it legal to be a monotheist in ancient Rome. Julius Caesar was a progressive, right? He fought for the proletarians of Rome, and for that, the Roman senators, the wealthy families, killed him and stabbed him to death, right? And that was the end of the Roman Republic. After that, his nephew, Octavian, seized power. There was a civil war between various senators and Roman families. After the civil war was over, Julius Caesar's nephew Octavian took power and was declared Caesar Augustus. And that is the man that Mark Zuckerberg admires. He admires Caesar Augustus. That is who he admires. He admires the man who came to power after the smashing of the Roman Republic and who presided over the Roman Empire, becoming worse and worse, and abolishing the democratic aspects of it, and having a Senate that was meaningless, National Assembly that was meaningless, and having a man ruler, a monarch. But of course, the ancient Romans were told that their ruler was God. He was a god. The Romans believed that the king, the emperor, was a god, a living god. The emperor was believed to be a living god, and Caesar Augustus was the first emperor of Rome after the fall of the Roman Republic to proclaim himself to be a living god. A living god. This is the man that Mark Zuckerberg admires. And he says he admires him because he created world peace. Well, he didn't really create world peace. He created a world empire. Many people rose up and resisted his authority all across the world. They called it Pax Romana because there was only one empire, unipolarity. But there was a lot of suffering. There was a lot of mistreatment. And there was a lot of misery under the rule of Caesar Augustus. I don't know if any of you have all heard the phrase, all roads lead to Rome. But that refers to the fact that in Rome, the way the Roman Empire functioned was that it was the middleman. The only roads that were allowed were roads that led to Rome. You couldn't build a road from one part of the empire to the other. Rome was the middleman in all trade. You could not trade except through Rome. All roads led to Rome. And it was the center of global trade. That's how the Roman Empire functioned. If you were going to do business, if your province or your kingdom wanted to, export products, you had to export it to the Romans, and then they could give it to somebody else. They were the middleman in all transactions. That's how the Roman Empire functioned. And I would argue that the Atlanticist global order of Wall Street in our time is a lot like Rome. And it shouldn't be a surprise that Mark Zuckerberg of Silicon Valley admires Caesar Augustus, and that Rome was in the business of holding back historical progress. They had an outdated, primitive system of slavery. But all across the world, feudalism was starting to emerge. There were starting to be feudal societies springing up across Europe and in the Middle East and other places, Africa. And what Rome did was beat those societies down and force them to pay tribute. Rome was holding back history and beating down societies that had a higher mode of production. The Roman Empire, much like Silicon Valley, much like American telecom giants, much like Wall Street and the big oil banker monopolies, is about holding back history, trying to stop the wheels of history from grinding ahead so that they can stay on top. The world must end. Human progress must end because we are at the top. We quit while we're ahead. We are winning the game, and so we declare game over. That is the Roman Empire's perspective. That is the perspective of Silicon Valley. That is the perspective of the Wall Street oil banking elite. That is the perspective of the American ruling class. It is a pessimistic perspective. It is a pessimistic perspective. Rome was a reactionary empire. Western capitalism is a reactionary empire. And these are facts. But folks, even within the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar emerged as a progressive. And even within our country at this time, the specter of populism and popular power and socialism is hanging over our heads. It's hanging over our heads in this time. The city-building tendency, the drive of human beings to build a better world and build a better life, is hanging over our heads. And as much as this election is a nightmare, as much as the economy is getting worse. All right, so we got Assadists and exercise. All right. As much as we are in a reactionary time, the will of human beings to keep progressing has not faded away and will continue to assert itself. And that is how I ended my recent book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. So, because this is so tied up with what we're talking about, I thought I would read the final section of the Kamala Harris book, the conclusion, tonight, and talk about the specter of populism that is hanging over U.S. society in our time. So I'm reading from Kamala Harris and the Future of America. We are forced once again to revisit Sigmund Freud and his attempt to interpret the sentiments in religion which others find satisfying. Freud writes of this oceanic feeling he cannot understand. A feeling can only be a source of energy if it is the expression of a strong need. The derivation of religious needs from the infant's helplessness and the longing for the father aroused by it seem to be incontrovertible, especially since the feeling is not simply prolonged from childhood days, but is permanently sustained by the fear of the superior power of fate. I cannot think of any need of childhood as strong as the need for a father's protection. Thus, the part played by this oceanic feeling, which might seek something like the restoration of limitless narcissism, is ousted from a place in the foreground. Within human beings, especially in times of hardship and instability, there is a strong desire, not for revenge and chaos or for brutality and cruelty, but rather for a force of strength and power that will protect them and ensure justice. Not only in religion, but in the history of populism in the United States, one can see these desires being fulfilled. The great populist leaders of U.S. history have been those who pandered to this desire for strong, effective, compassionate leadership to protect the downtrodden. When the country was gripped by divisions and economic strife created by the primitive, barbaric practice of chattel slavery, the first mass expression of opposition came in the form of a religious movement called the Second Great Awakening. Reverend Charles G. Finney and others convened tent revival meetings and great religious gatherings to denounce slavery, calling for the country to repent from this sinful practice. In the aftermath of these outpourings of religious opposition to slavery, political opposition to it soon emerged on a national stage with the rise of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was a rural lawyer from the wild, newly settled territory of Illinois. He was 6 feet tall, and he had a booming voice. He condemned the rich and powerful with statements such as, quote, "These capitalists generally act harmoniously and in concert to fleece the people. And now that they've gotten into a quarrel with themselves, we are called upon to appropriate the people's money to settle their quarrel." Actual quote from Abraham Lincoln. And it is the eternal struggle between these two principles, right and wrong, throughout the world. They are the two principles that have stood face to face from the beginning of time and will ever continue to struggle. The one is the common right of humanity, and the other is the divine right of kings. It is the same principle in whatever shape it develops. It is the same spirit that says, "You toil and work and earn bread, and I'll eat it." No matter in what shape it comes, whether from the mouth of a king who seeks to bestride the people of his own nation and live by the fruits of their labor, or of one race of men as an apology for enslaving another race, it is the same tyrannical principle. Another quote from Abraham Lincoln. Songs hailed this anti-slavery rabble-rouser, saying, "Old Abe Lincoln came up from the wilderness." Another anthem widely sung by Lincoln's supporters ended with the lines, "Success to the old-fashioned doctrine that men are created all free. Down with the power of the despot, wherever his stronghold may be." Lincoln was not Trump, a selfish bully displaying crass rudeness and indifference to others. Lincoln was not Kamala Harris, seeking to unleash a torrent of destruction in vengeance for his own perceived victimhood. Lincoln was portrayed as a strong, powerful father figure ready to beat back the forces of injustice and poverty and to defend the helpless. Karl Marx spoke of him in similar tones, writing in 1864, quote, this is from Karl Marx, "The working men of Europe feel sure that as the American War of Independence initiated a new era of ascendancy for the middle class, so the American anti-slavery war will do so for the working class. They consider it an earnest epoch of the time that it fell to the lot of Abraham Lincoln, the single-minded son of the working class, to lead his country through the matchless struggle for the rescue of an enchained race and the reconstruction of a social world." During the 1930s, Huey Long ascended to the political leadership of Louisiana, first as governor and then as U.S. Senator. Long built an organization across the United States called the Share Our Wealth Movement. Long taxed the oil refining of the Rockefellers in Louisiana to bring a large amount of money into the state treasury. He used this money to build hospitals, fund literacy programs, construct bridges, and provide a large number of services to the people of Louisiana. The black community in particular gained due to Huey Long's efforts. Huey Newton, the founder of the Black Panther Party, was named by his parents in honor of Huey Long. Huey Newton's autobiography, Revolutionary Suicide, describes how Long enabled black women to become nurses and took other measures to help the black community despite the Jim Crow atmosphere. Long, like Lincoln, presented a personality of both strength and compassion. Hailing his achievements for the people of Louisiana, he proclaimed, quote, "We have opened up night schools to educate the adult illiterates. We have paved the highways. We have built free bridges. We have taken the insane out of jail cells and placed them in modern institutions. We have eliminated barbarism. We have shut down the lottery. We have closed up the gambling dice. We have abolished the vice areas. Now the corporate element of this state, the cheap stooges who ransack this state for their allies, are being told what they can do and what they can't do, what they will pay and what they won't keep from paying for the welfare of Louisiana. We expect to have this state ruled by the people, not the lords and interests of high finance." That was Huey Long. Here's a picture of Huey Long. That's Huey Long. We expect to have the state ruled by the people, not the lords and interests of high finance. Explaining his vision for rescuing the country with the Share Our Wealth movement, Huey Long said, "Now if you have on that table the food and the clothing and the products that it takes for 125 million people to live on, any man with a thimbleful of sense ought to know that you can't take 85% off that table and give it to one man, that you are bound to have 2/3 of the people starving because they haven't got enough to eat. How many men ever went to a barbecue and would let one man take off the table what is meant for 9/10 of the people to eat? The only way you'll be able to feed the balance of the people is to bring back some of that grub that he ain't got no business with. Now, how are you going to feed the balance of the people? What's Morgan and Baruch and Rockefeller and Mellon going to do with all that grub? They can't eat it. They can't wear the clothes. They can't live in the house. Give them a yacht. Give them a palace. Send them to Reno and get them a new wife when they want it, if that's what they want. But when they've got everything on the God's living earth that they can eat and they can wear and they can live in, and all that their children can live in and wear and eat, and all that their children's children can wear and eat, all their children's children can use, then we've got to call Mr. Morgan and Mr. Rockefeller and Mr. Mellon back and say, come here, put some of that stuff back on the table here that you took away. You don't need that. Leave something else for the American people to consume. We're not going to destroy the Gulf Refining Company. We're not going to destroy the Standard Oil Company, but we're going to say that the limit of any one man's stock ownership in the Standard Oil Company is from $3 to $5 million for that individual, and that the balance of the people in America own the balance of the Standard Oil Company's worth. We're going to say that every family in this country is entitled to the Florida and Texas and Louisiana homestead rights. That's up to $5,000, or 1/3 the average. A home and the comforts of a home, including an automobile and a radio, the things that it takes in that house to live on. As Roosevelt faced opposition in 1936 and moved toward enacting progressive reforms, such as the Works Progress Administration and reforms such as and Social Security, he became more and more of a populist himself. The press told of a textile worker in South Carolina shaking Roosevelt's hand and proclaiming that he was the first man in the White House to know that my boss is a son of a bitch. Roosevelt delivered his 1936 speech in Madison Square Garden as he faced widespread opposition from the National Association of Manufacturers and the possible threat of a military coup by fascist sympathizers. These sympathizers had already attempted to do so with the business plot. Roosevelt lambasted his predecessors, proclaiming, "For 12 years, this nation was afflicted with hear nothing, see nothing, do nothing government. The nation looked to the government, but the government looked away. 9 mocking years with the golden calf, and 3 long years of the scourge. 9 crazy years at the ticker, and 3 long years in the breadline. Powerful influences today strive to restore the kind of government with its doctrine that government is best which is most indifferent. The notion of laissez-faire, free market, and utopian capitalism, long promoted by British bankers and predatory factory owners, was thoroughly rejected by Roosevelt. He knew his progressive reforms had faced widespread opposition from the ruling class, saying, "We had to struggle against the old enemies of peace, business and financial monopoly, speculation, reckless banking, class antagonism, sectionalism, and war profiteering. We now know that the government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one single candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hatred for me, and I welcome their hatred." Earl Browder was the Communist Party presidential candidate in 1936, but he made very clear that his campaign was a struggle to defeat the Republicans. The question on the table was democracy or fascism, and Roosevelt's populist program of using the state to provide employment and to build infrastructure, while mobilizing organized labor, was democracy. The plan of the factory owners for resolving the crisis with mass political repression, demonization of the Soviet Union, military spending, and concentration camp labor had to be defeated. Communist leaders like William Z. Foster understood that a popular front against fascism was needed at the time. The Communist Party stood arm in arm with Roosevelt, a populist, against the Harrises and the Trumps of the day, and their agenda of low wages, prisons, hostility toward Russia and China, and plans to deal with overpopulation by exterminating quote-unquote useless eaters. Following the 1936 election, Roosevelt defended the right of workers to occupy their factories in the sit-down strike wave of 1936 and 1937. During the episode known as Labor's Gettysburg in Flint, Michigan, Roosevelt sent the military to defend the strikers from the local police and strike-breaking militias. The mass anti-communist hysteria of McCarthyism that set in following the Second World War and Roosevelt's death was necessary because a huge coalition had been built. Roosevelt, the Communist Party, the Civil Rights Congress, the Congress for Industrial Organizations, and the American Youth for Democracy, and many other progressive, anti-fascist, and democratic networks existed, fighting for America's working families and calling for brotherhood and friendship with the people of the world. The specter of populism, genuine left-wing populism, not Trump's demagogy, now hangs over the United States. It is only a matter of time before movements fighting for the mobilization of state power to protect the suffering millions become bolder and bolder. Such a movement will not come from within the confused, distorted, synthetic left any more than it will come from the racism and cruelty of the right. Such a movement can only flourish by going to the masses and addressing their real needs. Who are the geopolitical rivals of the United States? Who are these authoritarian regimes, so-called, U.S. leaders impose sanctions on and condemn with such venomous contempt? In Latin America, they are the Bolivarians. They are socialists, influenced by Marxism, Christianity, indigenous traditions, and the legacy of anti-colonialism in South and Central America. In Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and elsewhere, they have instituted public control over natural resources, built roads, wiped out illiteracy, and enabled millions to rise up from poverty. In China, it is a government that took what was once the sick man of Asia and made it into a superpower. The Chinese Communist Party has lifted more than 800 million people from poverty. It has sent spacecraft to the far side of the moon and built Huawei, the largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. With China's investment in fusion energy research, it threatens to render fossil fuels, an essential aspect of Wall Street and London's domination of global markets, to be obsolete. What Mao Zedong started with a peasant army in the mountains has shaken the world. The Chinese Communist Party's vision of reinventing the global economy on the basis of win-win cooperation points toward a world without war and poverty and inspires people across the globe. The real achievements of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in terms of building schools, hospitals, and power plants in the developing world points to the promise of being more than hollow words. The current leadership of Russia rescued the country from the disastrous results of the fall of the Soviet Union. This was done by placing oil and natural gas under public control and centralizing the economy around state-controlled firms, not the anarchy of production. Russia continues to preside over poverty alleviation in the Far East and an explosion of its agricultural sector. Russia is cooperating with many African countries to help them expand their economies and continue on the road of poverty alleviation. The Eurasian Economic Union, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Bolivarian Alternative for Latin America, all stand as contrary examples to the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. The Bretton Woods institutions are committed to policies of deregulation and demolishing the economies of developing countries. While symbolic self-criticisms about being, quote, too neoliberal echo from the halls of Western global financial centers, these words are hollow bombast. Hollow bombast. These institutions, like almost all economic discourse in Western countries, is predicated on greed is good, Adam Smith thinking. It is the belief that free trade and the control of global trade routes by Western financiers can somehow produce an ideal outcome for humanity. However, the built-in problem of the capitalist mode of production, described by Karl Marx long ago, has not gone away. The capitalist is constantly driving to produce more and more goods for as little cost as possible. The capitalist reduces the amount of labor involved in production, replacing it with machines, and creating a falling rate of profits. Machines do not create surplus value. Only humans do. Machines replace workers on the assembly lines, increasing unemployment. The remaining workers' jobs become de-skilled by technology, and wages drop as a result. Soon, the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold. As the capitalist works to increase profits, the worker is driven to produce harder and harder, but his ability to consume what he produces is drastically reduced. Soon, the market is glutted with products that cannot be sold. The stock market crashes. An unnatural crisis that only takes place in the capitalist mode of production exists. Plenty creates poverty. Abundance leads to want. People become homeless because there are too many houses. People become hungry because there is too much food. Production organized for profit cannot escape this natural problem. The huge technological leaps brought about by the computer revolution have only exacerbated this problem. The only way out is for the banks, factories, and industries to be organized by state central planners and forced to work in the interests of society. Production for profit cannot continue. As millions are unemployed, hungry, and losing their homes amid the economic fallout of the pandemic, the words of Roosevelt about hear nothing, see nothing, do nothing government should be ringing in our ears. As millions suffer, even Bernie Sanders' minimal program of social democratic reforms couldn't be tolerated by the oligarchy of oil bankers, prison profiteers, weapons manufacturers, and Silicon Valley fascists who run the United States of America. Millions are now outcast and starving, watching their country crumble with unpaved roads, improperly purified water, and a failing system of education and health care. Trump could not liquidate the crisis. Kamala Harris will be equally impotent. As racist statues are torn down by liberal protesters, and Trump's demagogy leads toward even greater instability, the longing on the part of much of the population is not for violence and vengeance. There is a strong desire for the oceanic feeling of oneness, solidarity, and human life, the glue that holds civilization together and enables whole societies to rise up from the ashes. There is a longing for leadership that is not cynical and bigoted or vengeful and destructive. There is a longing for a real government of action that can fight for those who are suffering, bring a divided country together, smash the rule of big bankers and profiteers, and completely reinvent the country. The ruling elite knows that the specter of populism, the specter of 21st century socialism, is hanging over their heads. It is not the specter of a foreign conspiracy or a demagogic politician, but the recognition that the people of the country will soon be rising in their millions to demand a society that puts their needs first. And that is the final section of my book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America. I hope you check it out. It's been getting lots of good reviews. On that note, folks, I will be taking the roll call. I'll be calling you out as I see you. Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you. And then I will start answering your super chat questions. Names and locations. England. Someone from England is with us. Long Island, New York. Is with us. Will Lotz. Sammy in Chicago. Union, New Jersey. Mississippi, JT24. Nate in Utah. Kieran from San Diego. Somewhere in the USA. Jack from New York. San Jose. Sam in Los Angeles is with us. Detroit is with us. Amy from South Carolina is with us. Long Island City, Queens is with us. Jason in Tampa, Florida. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox. Alaska. Dan from Iran. Vallejo, California. Arthur in Arizona is with us. Gina in Arkansas. Denver, Ontario, Canada. Anthony Penza in Cleveland. Milwaukee. Jose Gonzalez from Venezuela. Lily from Atlanta. Rusty from Culver City, California. Pirate Alex from Cleveland. Charlie from Ottawa. Northern California. Salem, Oregon. Poland. Max the Sax from Virginia. Don from Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Greetings from Cascadia. Toronto. Melbourne, Australia. Elise in Alexandria. G in Cincinnati area. Very good. Very, very good. Toronto. Kieran. Welcome, welcome. Who else is with us tonight? Bill from the United States. Lyle from China. Chicago. Leipzig, East Germany. Poppy, Italy. Helen from Melbourne. American Red 1917 says hi. Rapid City, South Dakota. SpaceX Broom Closet. Ireland. Salt Lake City. Matthew from Sydney, Australia is with us. Welcome, Matthew. Welcome, welcome. Who else is with us tonight? I will call you out. Balthazar from Oakland. Melbourne, Australia. Dave from Ancortas, West Virginia. Very good. Who else is with us this evening? Vosh Gaming Room beneath the Pentagon. Very funny. Amsterdam, Australia. Victoria. Kendall. Very good. Very, very good. Who else is with us? Anybody else? Anybody else with us tonight? Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Poppy, Italy. Anybody else? Names and locations. Dublin, Ireland. Occupied Ireland. Christian, Indiana. Very good. All right. Anybody else? Longshan, Toronto. Gandalf the Wizard from the Middle East. Interesting. All right. I always thought Gandalf was a little more European. I heard his character was modeled on Wotan or Odin. But there you go. Eureka, California. Falls Church, Virginia. Melbourne, Australia. Locked down in Melbourne. Public domain from Ohio in New York now. Okay. Greetings, folks. Just getting back home from North Carolina, says Dust James. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Toronto. Buenos Aires. Baltimore. Very good. Very, very good. Very, very good. Ben in Toronto. You should make audiobooks of City Builders and Vandals and the Kamala book and sell them on Audible or something. Oh, well, I'm not sure how one goes about setting that up, but I would do it. Shaniqua from Buffalo, New York is with us. Very, very good. Very, very good. Sacramento. Matt Williams. Very, very good. All righty. Des Moines, Iowa in the house. Very good. Glad you're here, Des Moines. Glad you are here, Des Moines, Iowa. Very good. Anyone else? Anybody else? Anybody else? Montreal from Canada. Very good. Very, very good. All righty. North Carolina. Jordan says, you missed me, Indiana. Well, I didn't miss you this time. Palo Round Mountain, California. Atlanta default. Very good. Very good. Anybody else? Names and locations. You, the best you can. Okay. All right. All right. Anybody else? All right. So now, Tacoma, Washington. Very good. All righty. So now I'm going to start reading off your super chats. If you have more super chats, just send them in and I will answer them. All right. Springfield, Missouri. There you go. All right. So how do you challenge a QAnon person's thinking? Well, you can go over the wrong predictions that they have made. You can point out how ridiculous it is, the idea that North Korea is controlled by the CIA. What else could you talk about QAnon? You could talk about how, it really seems like Donald Trump is good friends with Epstein, and that, you could point to a lot of the facts, or you could just tell them all about socialism and tell them about capitalism. Now, they don't need a big, blood-drinking pedophile conspiracy. They could actually believe that the problem is capitalism, right? If you give people, a more realistic ideology, a real, a dialectical materialist understanding of history, that might, be a little more plausible. One thing that annoys me about QAnon, okay? Here's the thing about QAnon, right? So, like 2 years ago, I would say QAnon, and people would look at me like, what? And I'd say, there's this big movement called QAnon among Trump supporters. They'd be like, nah, what is that? I'd be like, there's all these Trump supporters who, believe that there's a secret group of pedophiles. And they'd be like, come on, nobody thinks that. And people would roll their eyes at me. They'd be like, that's one of those dumb things Caleb believes in, QAnon. Oh, boy. Now, right before the election, every major news network has done a hit piece on QAnon. So these same people that rolled their eyes at me when I told them what QAnon was they think they're experts on QAnon. Oh, yes, we know all about QAnon. But if you ask them what QAnon is, they say, well, QAnon, it's like these Trump supporters, and they don't like pedophiles, and they think pedophiles are in the government, and they're like bad or something. It's like, okay, right? So first you didn't know what QAnon was. Now you're thinking QAnon is a big, big threat. It's like, you can tell that QAnon is no longer a threat by the fact that liberals are all now talking about it. If QAnon was an actual threat when I was talking about it, if QAnon was an actual threat, you and me would be talking about it, and liberals would be going, that's stupid. I didn't see that on CNN. It's obnoxious, right? I knew about QAnon, like when it was getting started. I heard Trumpers talking about it, And now, all these people who never heard of QAnon, now they've been given the cues by the mainstream media. An economic constitution, and so suddenly they're experts on it. I think QAnon is pretty played out, honestly. And it's, like they're banning it from platforms and Facebook. It's like, it's not, it's not necessary. It's played out. It's pretty last year. QAnon is pretty last year. There's still people doing it. Most of them have moved on. Most of the Trump universe have moved on to something else, right? I think QAnon is pretty last year. There's plenty of other, dangerous Trump stuff going on, like Proud Boys and stuff like that, or the poor boys, as Joe Biden calls them. But yeah, QAnon was a big deal for a while, and liberals never heard of it because they live in a bubble. And that's one of my biggest frustrations with mainstream liberals. They live in a bubble, and it's obnoxious. And now QAnon is pretty played out, right? The media, Trump won't denounce it or whatever. Alrighty. Okay. How do I promote socialism to a DPRK defector living in the USA? I would pick a different audience if I was you. I would probably talk to somebody else. Defectors from socialist countries are usually not the best people to try and talk to about these kind of things. So, yeah, can't much help you there. One thing perhaps, since this person is Korean, perhaps you could talk to them about Korea, and don't try to sell them on communism. Talk about Korea and Korea's history and the history of Japanese occupation and the heroic efforts of the Korean people to resist, and talk about maybe the need for peace on the Korean Peninsula. Maybe not talk to this person about trying to convince them that socialism is good or that the government in the North is good, but how much better it would be if, there was peace on the Korean Peninsula and the two governments recognized each other and were much closer than they are now. Maybe focus on that with that person. But I don't know. Again, that's not the kind of, good luck, right? Defectors are not pleasant to engage with on these kind of issues. Do anarchists support cancel culture more because of their ideology? Well, maybe. I mean, the thing is, the typical cancel culture person that you meet, it's a very emotional thing. Um, you know, there was a friend of mine in college who had very conservative parents, very right wing parents. And he was a little bit on the spectrum. Not a little bit. I mean, he was on the spectrum, as they say, autism or whatnot. And, this friend of mine, I remember that he just got into this mode where everyone was racist, everyone was sexist, everyone was transphobe, and he was going to yell at them. And I remember I used to argue with him. I remember my friend, I remember he was, he would just, and he would be up all night, pounding the keyboard on the computer because somebody said something transphobic somewhere on the internet, or somebody said something racist somewhere on the internet, and he was just furious about it. And the anger that this friend of mine had, I knew him well, and it wasn't really at people on the internet that were transphobic. He was angry about, he was angry at his family. He was angry at his parents. He was angry at his conservative parents. And this was his way of kind of fighting back. It was his rage, right? It was, you're racist, mom and dad. You're sexist, mom and dad. And that is kind of, that's a common thread that I've seen with people that are super into the cancel culture. And I can see why anarchism would appeal to such people too. It's a certain kind of like explosive, childish anger, right? And, they're angry for very good reason at their family. They've been mistreated. They're angry at society, perhaps related to their, being on the spectrum or being disabled or something. And yeah, it was somebody I was pretty close to in college. And I remember, I would just say to him, I remember saying to him, like, why do you care, right? So somebody on the other side of the country said something transphobic. How does this affect you at all? It does not affect you, my friend. Like, calm down. And he was just so full of rage, this rage, this explosive rage. And it wasn't really about somebody on the internet who said something transphobic. It was about his parents. It was about his family. It was about his life circumstances and some of the difficulties he was having. And I mean, that's deeply sad. It was deeply sad. And, you hope that someone can grow out of that stage, right? And people do, right? I mean, they tend to, after their 20s are over, when they, in their 30s, they start to, they start to see the world a little bit differently, and they start to kind of, adjust to being an adult. But I see that a lot when I see people on the internet that are really into the cancel culture, like obsessive into the cancel culture, the kind of people who would like look up someone's home address or try to call up someone's boss. It's like, it's not really about the person, right? It's not about the person. It's about something else. It's about, deep inner feelings of rage that they have. And I mean, in the Kamala book, I kind of talk about that. I talk about the psychological motivations behind a lot of things, and that, anarchism, right? I mean, okay, so what is anarchism, right? There are very serious ideological anarchists there who've studied Proudhon and Bakunin and, developed very serious theories. But I was a part of Occupy Wall Street, and at Occupy Wall Street, I had this conversation with so many people over and over and over again. It was a very annoying conversation. I would meet somebody, try to sell them a communist newspaper or whatever, and they'd say, I'm an anarchist. I'd say, oh, okay. Do you like Proudhon? Do you like, Kropotkin? What kind of anarchist are you? I'm not any kind of anarchist, man. I have my own ideas. That's why I'm an anarchist. Nobody tells me what to think. Yeah, I'm an anarchist. And I'd just be like, oh boy, right? And, a lot of anarchists are like that, right? And they're doing lots of drugs, and they're in a rock and roll band, or their favorite punk band is what told them about anarchism, and they have a vague understanding that big corporations are like bad, and the police state is like bad or something, and there's not a lot of depth there. Now, to be fair, though, I told you, there are many, many anarchists who are the complete opposite of that, who are very, very thoughtful, insightful, educated people with very, very serious ideas. But for that second category of anarchists I described, I can see why they would be into cancel culture, right? They would have this desire to explosively punish somebody who broke a rule or something like that. But, to be fair, though, there's a lot of anarchists, famous, a lot of the founding anarchists, right? I mean, Mikhail Bakunin said a lot of anti-Semitic stuff. There were a lot of anarchists that were really into, all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, cancel culture. At the end of the day, right? I mean, people shouldn't be promoting racism. People shouldn't be, insulting other people's nationality or gender or sexual identity or whatnot. People shouldn't be allowed to just, say, you know, people shouldn't be allowed to just go through life being very bigoted and nasty to other people and not have consequences. I'm not saying people should be locked in jail for this kind of thing. That's not what I'm saying at all. But, I mean, calling out people who do nasty things isn't not inherently wrong at all, right? It's necessary, right? If no one ever calls them out on what they did, they might keep doing it. But at the same time, there's this culture of like people who you meet and it's like they don't do anything else and they don't have any bigger understanding of politics. They, in their minds, there are these bad people out there that are transphobic or racist or homophobic or sexist or whatever. And that's all politics means to them, is that there's a list of bad ists, bad type of ists, and they are going to go out and punish them, and that's going to prove that they're a good person, and it's not a good scene. Those kind of people aren't happy. I mean, they're not happy, right? If you don't have an optimistic vision in politics, if you're not trying to build socialism, if it's all just about being angry at somebody who tweeted something bad last week, you're not going to be happy, and you're not going to keep going with this. You're going to burn out eventually. So I would hope that people get beyond the cancel culture stuff. But there you go. All right. The next question was from somebody. It was from Kinky, I think. She said that she was on Patreon, but she was going to resume. Well, I'm going to do another Patreon live very soon. I'm planning to do another patrons only stream. So if you are a patron member, keep an eye on the Patreon messages because I'll be putting the link to our this month's patrons only stream, hopefully before the end of the month. If not, it'll be early November. We'll do it. We do one every month. We do a patrons only stream where I answer your questions. You can also message me if you're a patron, and every patron got a free copy of this book also. So, most of them have arrived. I know some of the ones that were like in the United Kingdom and stuff haven't gotten theirs yet. But if you're a patron and you haven't gotten it, be sure to shoot me a message because you are entitled to one. We're going to do a patrons only live stream where I engage directly, no opening. I just answer your questions. So that'll be fun. Sign up if you haven't done so already. Glad that this person's going to renew their membership in the patrons only thing. All good. Okay, now the next question I got was someone asked, does Dinesh D'Souza realize the Republican Party was radical and socialist back in the day? I think so. I think Dinesh D'Souza, he's way smarter than his content. I mean, his content consists of, going throughout history, finding bad people and making the case they were Democrats. It's so childish and so silly. And, he'll say things like Hitler was a Marxist. Even though Hitler, wanted to outlaw Marxism and thought Marxism was like a Jewish conspiracy. And, it's just like everyone who's not a 1980s Republican is not a conservative, so there's therefore a Democrat, right? I think he did an interview with one of these racist guys, Richard Spencer, and got him to say, oh, we don't totally believe in free markets. And he's like, aha, see, you're liberals. It's like, no, D'Souza doesn't, his work, he's smarter than his work. I mean, the fact that someone can be as educated as he is and not realize that there's a right-wing critique of capitalism, that there are conservatives that are not advocates of the free market. Basically, the premise of Dinesh D'Souza's work is that the only definition of conservative is 1980s Republican, right? If you are not a neocon Reagan Republican, you are not a conservative. So all these bad people throughout history who are right-wing, he discovers that they are not 1980s Republicans. So therefore, they must be Democrats. And all bad people throughout history were Democrats. That's basically his message. And it's really childish and stupid. And he's got a wife from Venezuela who hates her own people and is part of the Venezuelan opposition and wants more sanctions imposed on her own people and wants her own people to die. And she's awful. Dinesh D'Souza is not my favorite person. When he denies the genocide of Native Americans and says, oh, they all just died from disease. If he were to say that about the Nazi genocide, that would be illegal in most European countries. But he says it about the genocide of Native Americans and gets away with it. Yeah, he's a despicable person. Not a big fan of Dinesh D'Souza. All right. Now, so this person said Joe Biden will sign the TPP and will carry out Chile privatizations. I mean, will Joe Biden sign the TPP? I think that's very likely, but the TPP is just part of this trade war with China. I mean, it was like trade war with China take one, basically, but it gave a lot of benefits to the countries in Asia that were aligned with the United States. And I think Trump ripped it up because he didn't like the benefits it gave to Asian countries that were agreeing to trade with the USA and not China. It created a trade zone, gave special preferential trade treatment to all these countries in Asia as long as they didn't trade with China. And I think the Trump people didn't like that because they're like quote unquote economic nationalists, and they thought that would benefit these other countries too much and come at the expense of the United States and trade. Well, Trump is all about isolating and attacking China. Biden also is, but there's different strategies about how do you do it. Do you build a global coalition against China, or do you just put up a wall? As far as Chile privatizations, well, I mean, I don't even know what that means, right? I mean, is Biden going to get rid of food stamps? I mean, yeah, he's a very free market guy. Yes, I mean, he's got neocon kind of people, and but I'm not sure that's. I thought that was a very strange. I mean, we're not living under Allende, right? Trump is certainly not a socialist or Allende. Yes, I'll talk about the Bolivian elections. That was a strange one, right? Trump is not Salvador Allende. He's not moving us towards socialism. So, this person, I think they're trying to present Joe Biden as a Pinochet or something. That's a completely, that narrative is just way off in many, many ways. Alrighty. Okay, are Malthusianism, neoconservatism satanic? Well, first of all, Malthusianism and neoconservatism are completely different. Malthusianism is this economic theory that overpopulation is the cause of economic problems, that the food supply does not keep up with the population's growth, and it's wrong, and Marx ripped it to shreds. Neoconservatism is a theory about it's basically, it was in the late Cold War, the Republican Party adjusted itself. In the late Cold War, Republicans adjusted their messaging to basically be, they liked cowboy movies, right? Leo Strauss, Irving Kristol. It was kind of a new form of conservative politics that was adjusted for the time. So are they satanic? I mean, what does satanic mean? I mean, are they evil? Sure. Yeah, I don't like Malthusianism. I don't like neoconservatism. But, they're two different things. So, I don't know. Strange question. All right. They're attacking journalists in the West that are critical as Assadists. Yeah, and people say, I guess this upcoming documentary they're doing about the White Helmets for BBC is going to have nasty attacks on those who criticize the White Helmets in it. And, Vanessa Beeley, Eva Bartlett, and some other people are going to be targeted. And they call them Assadists. And there's no such thing as an Assadist, right? There's Baathism, which is the ideology of the Syrian government, Baathist Arab socialism. But there's no such thing as Assadism. So, yeah, that's very bizarre. But it's, they're always coming up with a blacklist, right? Who you're supposed to hate. And, and the Syrian government is a left-wing government. It's a socialist government. Baathist Arab socialism was a left-wing current. I mean, they're socialists, they're progressives. They believe in, freedom of religion. They have trade unions in their factories. They're aligned with the communist parties. Yeah, did I miss a super chat? Let me go back. Did I miss one? I'm looking up, I'm scrolling up. I saw David's super chat. Yeah, about Bolivian elections. I wrote that down. Is there another one though? Did I miss another super chat? No. Okay. Yeah, it's written down. I'm getting to it. All right. The person said, when I exercise, do I lift weights? Yes, I do. I lift weights every other time. Every time I exercise, I do cardio, right? Either I get on the treadmill or on the bike or on the elliptical every time. And then every other time I lift weights, right? Because you're supposed to give your body time to get stronger, right? You're not supposed to lift weights every day. There's a logic to it. So you're supposed to, so yeah, I use weight machines generally. Is wealth to the strong, death to the weak satanic? Well, actually, that's from the Satanic Bible, right? That's from like the teachings of Anton LaVey. That quote, wealth to the weak and death to the weak, wealth to the strong. That's from Anton LaVey. Marx and Lenin on voting for bourgeois parties. Okay, writing that down. Marx, Lenin, bourgeois parties. Alrighty. righty. So, does the U.S. need an economic constitution? Well, I think what the person is referring to is an economic bill of rights, right? An economic bill of rights, which is something Roosevelt proposed. And I would be for an economic bill of rights. Yeah, right to health care, right to education, right to housing. I think that a socialist society would enshrine that, right? That it would be the responsibility of the state to make sure the population had those things. Okay. All right. Bolivian elections. Huge step forward, right? I mean, the coup regime was just defeated, was just ripped to shreds. The movement towards socialism, the party of Evo Morales, is back in power, and the right wing, Thailand. All right, the right wing did such a bad job, just such a bad job governing in the past year that the socialists are back in, and that they were robbed. They were toppled based on lies, right? The election that brought them to power was not rigged. That the last time it wasn't rigged, but they created all this propaganda in the media. And now, after a year, they finally had another free election after the coup, and the people once again voted for the socialists. And that Evo Morales has done economic miracles in the country. Tremendous economic miracles, highest rate of GDP growth, paved roads, wiped out illiteracy. Millions raised from poverty, electrification, industrialization, cooperation with China, mineral resources, natural gas. They have done amazing stuff, right, with a state central planned economy. And actually, the new president, Louis Aker, is, from what I understand, I'm saying his name probably wrong there, right? But the new president who was elected is somebody who was key in the economic planning in Bolivia, right? And that, the ruling class of Bolivia seemed to be so united against the socialists, but that didn't stop them. The population is well organized. The Bolivarian circles, the communities, yeah. The Bolivian elections, we should all be happy about that, right? And that the balance of forces was so much that they couldn't claim it was rigged. They couldn't, just cancel the elections. The population was ready, and the balance of forces was not so that they could continue to let this coup regime remain in power. Áñez, let's see though, the inauguration hasn't happened yet, right? And keep in mind, so they won the elections. The whole world has seen that, so it's going to be very hard for the right wing to do anything. But they're still claiming, the right wing, no one's listening to them, is claiming that it was rigged, that it's communists, evil communists. They always do that. So there you go. Marx and Lenin on voting for bourgeois parties. Well, Marx endorsed the Republican Party in the 1864 presidential election. I just read to you about how he endorsed Abraham Lincoln because he saw them as fighting against slavery. Marxists were key in the campaign of Henry George for mayor of New York City. Now, Henry George was not a Marxist. He was not a socialist. He was an advocate of his own economic theories about taxing land values. And that in some cases it is strategic for Marxists to endorse bourgeois parties. But in other cases, it's not, right? It just depends on the circumstances. If Roosevelt had not been reelected in 1936, things would have been very ugly. If Lincoln had not been reelected in 1864, things would have been very ugly. Other times there's situations where that's not the case. So, people want to pour condemnation, never endorse a bourgeois candidate. No, there are times, but you have to be honest about it. You have to be honest about it and make clear this bourgeois candidate, make clear why you're doing it, make clear this person's not a socialist, we're doing it for strategic reasons. You need to be honest about what you do as a leftist or a socialist and why you make the decisions you make, right? And that Marx was not telling people Lincoln was a socialist. Lincoln was a populist. He was an advocate of opposing slavery, and he didn't even want to abolish slavery, but he was forced to by material circumstances. Lenin talks about the need to support bourgeois nationalists against the imperialists, and how even the emir of Afghanistan, had to be supported against the imperialists. And Lenin, he organized the Conference of the Peoples of the Far East, right? And there were all kinds of kings and religious Muslims and others, but we supported anyone against the imperialists. The imperialists are the main enemy. That was the thinking. Alrighty. Thailand. I haven't followed it enough. I don't know enough about it. I'm gonna have to do some research before I tell you anything, because I owe it to you all not to say the wrong thing. The wrong thing. And I don't want to say the wrong thing about Thailand. So I'm gonna look into it. All right. Is there anything else people want me to talk about this evening? Anything else on people's minds before we conclude? Any other super chat questions? Anything else that we should talk about? All righty. If not, I think we can conclude. It's been fun. I'm ready for this election to be over. I am totally ready for this election to be over. I'm supposed to do an AMA with this intellectual society tomorrow. Theology and Satan. Okay. All right. I'm supposed to do an AMA with some group tomorrow around 5 p.m. Eastern. Some intellectual society. So I'll post that on YouTube. I'll record it after and repost it on YouTube. Theology and Satan. Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, the idea of an oppositional force that is opposed to God is big in many religions. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in some traditions, there is like an angel who challenges your faith and challenges your loyalty to God on God's behalf, right? And that is the concept of Satan. Satan isn't seen as an enemy of God, but rather is seen as somebody working for God to test your faith, and that's how many people interpret the book of Job, which is in the Old Testament, where Job is just this good, obedient follower of God, and Satan says to God, I will test his faith, and that is, Satan is not the enemy of God. He's the angel who tests the faith. And that in some of the older, in pre-Christian traditions, a lot of times Satan was seen that way. Whereas it wasn't till really the rise of the Roman Empire and that form of Christianity that you got the notion of Satan as a force of opposition, right? And it's also interesting that in the Christian Bible there's references not only to Satan, but there's references to what is it called? Now the name is escaping me. Oh goodness gracious, what is the name of it? Oh Jesus, the cult, this ancient cult, right, of Moloch. Right, Moloch, right? And then Allen Ginsberg has the poem Moloch, Moloch, Nightmare of Moloch, right? And that there were also, in addition to, there were these cults that would spring up among the Hebrew people. The cult of Moloch, right, which was a cult of, some deity that you sacrificed your children to, and that there would be sexual orgies or something while they, and that there was a condemnation, and it's in the Old Testament, a big condemnation of the god of Moloch. Right, and there's the story of Moses comes down from the mountain, and he sees the people, the children of Israel, worshiping the golden calf, right? And they've started to worship this golden calf, and he smashes the golden calf, and then he kills half the people, right? Or he kills a big number of people for worshiping the golden calf. And that it seems like throughout the Old Testament there are these like cults that are springing up that Judaism or the Israelites see as like a threat to their theistic order, and they start cracking down on them, like the cult of Moloch or the cult of the golden calf. That happens. And then also, in the Old Testament, there's the idea of Satan as kind of like testing one's faith. And then there's the narrative of the fallen angel, which some Christians accept, right? That's in the writings of Milton, right? The poet Milton, right? Paradise Lost, right? The idea that Satan was an angel who launched some kind of rebellion against God in heaven and was kicked out of heaven and is now a force of opposition. That narrative is certainly popular, the fallen angel narrative. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what the person was asking about, but that's what they were getting at. So, alrighty, folks. On that note, I will conclude. So Remember that we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. I'm out. Have a good night, folks.